Can everybody see my slide? Yes, thumbs up, we can see. Okay, good deal. So I know my topic says, or my title is The Good, the Bad, and Everything in Between of Technology and Chemistry Education, but let's be real, we really can't cover that in a 45-minute talk. It's not possible. And so I will just kind of briefly give an overview of a couple of papers that my group published, and talk a little bit about what I mean by technology. So I was at a talk recently at BCC actually, and the presenter gave her acknowledgments first, and I was like, that makes so much sense. She said, so we don't rush through it at the end. And I'm like, I want to start doing that. So maybe you want to pick that up too. But I would like to acknowledge the participants that participated in this, my colleagues. So I'm at West Virginia University right now, but I collected these data at the University of Oklahoma. And so I'd like to thank my team there. And I would like to thank my students that helped with this work. So Dia, Lena, Amy, Womboy, and Danielle all helped out with these. Dia and Lena are graduate students. Amy, Womboy, and Danielle are all undergrads. Okay. All right, so quick question. What are some ways you use technology in your room? So feel free to unmute, feel free to put it in the chat, but a couple of seconds, 30 seconds, real quick. What are some ways that you see technology being used in your classroom? iClickers, absolutely. Thank you, Kimberly. Poll everywhere, taking notes, yep, tutoring, showing problems in a lot of different ways, QR codes, cell phones, GroupMe, yep. PhET, yep. And yes to all of these. I think there's so many different ways that we use technology. I've never heard of Catchbox, but I want to try that. Smart boards, so many different ways to use technology. And one of the things that when Nikita had sent this to me and said, oh, it's technology, I Googled what technology is, because anytime I think technology, I think computers. But technology literally is defined as anything that can make our lives easier or more comfortable, more accessible. And so all of these things absolutely count as technology. For this talk, we're going to be looking at technology as online homework systems, which is a very small part of what technology is. And so real quick, the background. So I'll give you the outline for the presentation today. We'll talk a little bit about the background, kind of creating a theoretical framework, a literature background for the work. We'll talk about the first study. We'll reflect on that, discussions as necessary, and then we'll jump into the second study, again, pause, reflect, and then we'll close it out. So real quick, you're all here because you're probably involved in chemistry in one way or another, whether you teach Gen Chem or organic or higher level. Gen Chem is important. There are a lot of studies out there that have shown that general chemistry is, for better or worse, serving as a gateway course for a lot of students who want to pursue STEM fields. So it's very important that we know what's going on in Gen Chem. In addition to Gen Chem, attitudes are important. So I do a lot of stuff with attitudes, the affective domain, how our students perceiving things. And studies are showing that the affective domain is actually very important in kind of figuring out how to retain our students in STEM fields. Technology is also helpful, and research has shown that using these different types of technologies that you've mentioned can help with retaining knowledge and for learning in students. Okay, so this is all important. And then finally, so again, like I said, for technology, for this study, we're looking at, for this talk, we're looking at online homework systems. And for the purpose of the study, there are two online homework systems, adaptive and traditional. So the adaptive, if you're familiar with ALEKS, kind of adapts to the individual learner. So for example, I start Gen Chem and I have no idea what's going on. My learning path is going to look very different than someone who comes into Gen Chem and has taken AP classes, has a pretty extensive background. That learning path will look different. The traditional system says, hey, everybody does 20 questions and we move on, or however many questions. Okay. All right. So what are some homework systems that you're familiar with? I mentioned ALEKS as an adaptive, but what other homework systems are you familiar with? Active Chem, Wiley Plus, Newton, yep. Mastering Chem, Connect, SmartWorks. Any other homework systems, online homework systems? Top Hat, Active, yes, 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 yes to all of those. And so you guys are throwing out both adaptive and traditional systems. I think more and more these systems are starting to have an adaptive component. So for the traditional ones, there's now an adaptive component. If you would like to know more about what adaptive looks like or means, you're not very familiar with them, please reach out. I'm happy to talk a lot more about that. Okay, so first talk, or the first study that I want to talk about, is this idea of the effect of online homework systems on student learning. So that QR code will take you to the paper if you're interested in looking at it more, getting a little bit more information. But Lena, Amy, and I worked on this paper, and there are a couple of research questions that we wanted to answer here. So how do students perform using traditional homework systems versus adaptive homework systems? Is there a difference in their performance? And then is there a difference in the level of retention, knowledge retention of these students, again, over the course of the semester? So those are the two research questions that this study sought to address. We looked at, so data were collected in fall 2018, and the participants, so we decided to use participants, or to say the participants were people that had completed at least 50% of the homework assignment. The thought process for that was, well, we wanted these students to have actually engaged, given the homework assignment a fair shot. And so we selected 50%. An argument could be made for whichever, but we decided to go with 50%. It was 2 sections, the same instructor. I was the instructor of record for both sections, and in both sections we used 2 different homework systems. So everything else was the same. The only difference was the homework system that was being used. All the students took their exams at the same time. There's asterisks there is for students with accommodations. They would take, it's the same exam, same thing. It was in person. 8 p.m. was when everybody would take it, but those that had accommodations would take it at the testing center, but it was the same exam. And so a real brief overview of the participants. So total enrollment for both classes were very similar. Let me see if I can find out. Total enrollment for both classes were very similar. So 305, 308 participants. So sapling was what it was called then. It's now called Achieve. 79% of participants, so completed at least 50% of the homework assignments for ALEKS, and then 85% sapling. I also put the times here, so the times that the classes met, just again for more information. To try and determine the equivalence or the similarities between both classes, we decided to look at the average ACT scores, and you'll see that they're very similar. So for all intents and purposes, we were assuming that these classes are very similar, with the only difference being the homework systems that they were using. So here's again, it's Chem 1, General Chemistry 1. These are the topics that are covered in this class, very similar to your typical Chem 1 course. Okay, so for the first research question, how do the students using adaptive versus traditional, how do they perform on exams over the course of the semester? And so to address this, we looked at the exam scores. There were 4 exams over the course of the semester, 3 during the semester, and then 1 final. And so when we looked at this, we looked at the averages. So how do they perform on the exams, looked at the averages, and then carried out t-tests to see whether or not there were significant differences between their performances on the exams. And so you'll see that consistently, the ALEKS section performed better than the sapling section across all 4 exams. And statistically significant differences, p-values less than 0.05, But Cohen's d, so the effect size indicates that this was a very small effect size. So yeah, we're seeing significant differences between the exams, but the effect size was pretty small. I do want to note that the averages are pretty similar. So this, for example, C's, this would still be considered D's. This would be a C, a D. So again, very similar averages, but the ALEKS section scoring a little bit higher. And then we also wanted to look at the grade distribution. So, okay, they're doing better on the exams, but are the grades, do they look similar? Are they different? And you'll see that across both. So I pulled this stat, the overall DFW rate. So remember, the participants for this study had to have completed at least 50% of the homework system, of the homework assignment. And so this does not represent everybody in the class, but it captures most of them. So the overall DFW rates were very similar, and was actually the same in both classes. But when we looked at the participants, when we looked at their grade breakdown, ALEKS students seemed to have slightly higher A's, but I was very interested in the B's and the C's. They had higher B's and lower C's. So more students are going from that C to the B in the ALEKS section compared to the sapling section. So to answer that first research question, yes, students in the adaptive, using the adaptive homework systems are doing better than students in the traditional. And so the second research question, all right, so they're doing better, but why are they doing better? And so to address this question, we wanted to look at the level of knowledge retention. So are they retaining knowledge at a different level, higher, lower level compared to students in the traditional? And so to address this, there were 4 exams over the course of the semester. The first exam was just the first exam. The second, third, and final exam were all cumulative. So the second exam had, I think, about 20 points, 10, 20 points that were cumulative. Third exam also had about 20 points that were cumulative. And then the final exam, 80% was cumulative with 20% new stuff. And so we took out those sections. So from exam 1, looked at the cumulative part. For exam 3, looked at exam 2. Exam 3 looked at the cumulative part. The final exam looked at the cumulative part and then compared it across the board. And so you'll see that for the second exam, so that first cumulative part, there wasn't a significant difference between the ALEKS and the sapling section. For exam 3, there was a pretty big difference. So the p-value, very, very small. The effect size was a little bigger compared to everything else.
From desktop Explore QN5.
And then for the final exam, there was also statistically significant difference in the averages. Again, not as big as for exam 3, but we're still seeing a pretty significant difference. So there are 2 columns here for the final exam. One is just the regular, and here there was an optional knowledge check. So one of the things that ALEKS does is it has these things called knowledge checks. And so after 30 days, or if you go in as the instructor and tell the system to do it, but maximum is 30 days, the system will kind of give you a cumulative quiz and say, all right, you've learned all these things. Well, do you remember them? And so there was an optional final knowledge check for the students that were using ALEKS, and 204 of them decided to do that. And so I pulled that out and then compared their exam average to the ones that didn't do it. There was a slight difference in that. It was about 1% different. But there still is a significant difference between those students and the students that just did sapling. So to answer question number 2, there was a difference in the level of retention in students that were using ALEKS, which is the adaptive system, versus students that were using the traditional system. And so in conclusion, for this study, both homework systems seem to help students do well. So again, looking at traditionally how students would do on Chem 1, these students are doing better with online homework systems regardless. But ALEKS seemed to have a more positive impact on student grades. So not only were students scoring higher on the exams, they were actually retaining knowledge more based on the data. But they also had shifted from B's to C's. So we're seeing higher, so lower D's and F's and higher A's and B's with students that were using ALEKS. And based off of this, so one of the things that ALEKS does, like I said, is it has those knowledge checks. That's really the only difference. Well, okay. There are a couple of differences between ALEKS and Sapling, which I think is now called Achieve. ALEKS allows essentially unlimited attempts to score a perfect score on whatever assignment they're given, but it can take a lot. And I'll talk about that in the next part of my talk. But this consistent and frequent testing, if you would, knowledge checks, so the checking, hey, do you guys remember this? Do you remember this? Could have caused improvement in grades, right? Especially for knowledge retention. If we're constantly going back and saying, hey, do you remember this? Do you remember this? That could cause what we're seeing in here. As with any study, there are limitations to this. And so one of the limitations that could be associated with this study is the fact that we only collected data in one semester. It's not all very easy to get people to be okay with, hey, we have 2 sections and we're going to do just two different things in those sections. So it was kind of hard to get us to do that multiple times. We only also used multiple choice exams. So this was a team taught course, and there are 5 sections. I think I taught 2, and three other instructors taught the other sections. And so that could be a bias. There's instructor bias in how the questions were written. And as if you're familiar with ALEKS at all, one of the things that always comes up is time on task. Students take a long time to get through ALEKS assignments. And so that could have influenced findings, but I would argue that that isn't necessarily a bad thing. So having students do more, spend more time studying isn't necessarily a bad thing. Other factors could have affected it. I remember talking to a colleague and she's like, well, time of day that students take a class could tell you a lot about the kinds of students that you have. And so there are so many other factors that it could have influenced the findings that we didn't take into account here. Implications based on our findings, based on the study, I would recommend that instructors consider giving students more opportunities to show that they've learned the material. One of the things that ALEKS does is again, there's a lot of repetition. There's a lot of, hey, do this and do this. Continuous low stakes assessment, I think, are beneficial for students. And one of the things that I've been, so this paper was published in 2020, but one of the things that I've been kind of playing around with based off this, other papers, other studies that I've done, other things that I've read, this idea of mastery grading could be a way to help students do well. And so mastery grading essentially says, all right, let's see your progress through the semester, right? How are you doing through the semester? And if we're providing students with multiple ways or multiple times to check their knowledge and say they didn't do well on the first exam, but we gave them a knowledge check after exam 2, and hey, they figured out how to balance an equation or whatever it is, I think they should be rewarded for that. And so I think one of the implications, one of the things from the study is, let's think about what they're learning as they progress through the semester, as opposed to, hey, what do they know at time A? They don't know what I want them to know they're done. Okay. So those are some implications, not just based on this study, but honestly based off things that I've done, things that I've read, that coming back to this and like, hey, these are some things that we should be thinking about. All right, so that was the first study. I want us to pause, reflect, and then let's talk about it. What are some things that kind of are like, yeah, I agree with this. I want to try this. What are some things you are trying right now? What are some things that you don't necessarily agree with as well? So let's take a little bit of time. You're welcome to unmute if that works, or put it in the chat too. What is that, Nikita?
So Anki is something that functions using, it's almost like a flashcard, kind of like a Quizlet, but it functions with something called spaced repetition learning. And I guess based off of how students respond, in the follow-up question, like, do you feel like you understood this concept or remember it? Like whether they select yes or no, it determines like how much amount of time should pass before they're exposed to that concept again, before they kind of like lose that knowledge. And it was just kind of like a comment, not necessarily like, I don't know, a
Yeah.
question, but it makes me think of that. Um, and maybe like how that spaced repetition and like flashcard games could kind of, I guess, use this way of studying or bringing up knowledge in spacious, in spaced
Yeah,
intervals to help keep students like fresh in their minds.
I like it. I've never heard of it, but I will look it up. Yes, Jack.
As an Alex user, I have a question over the two systems. So I'm very familiar with Alex and GenChem, and I played with Sapling many years ago. But seeing that you did this as the instructor, could you comment on like the balance of the amount of content for each assignment? Because I know that not every homework system has the same amount of content, and there are some areas in Alex that are pretty limited, and I'm sure every homework system has its strengths and weaknesses. So when you're looking at what the students were given in Alex versus Sapling, did you feel like you had similar content coverage within each system for them?
That's a very good question. And one of the ways that I did combat that was, so the sapling students also had access to Alex if they wanted it. That was one of the deals I had worked out with Alex. If they wanted it, they had it. Not a lot of them used it. But so that was one of the ways I did that. Another way was to give worksheets and other, like, just multiple things for them to be able to use. It's a balance. So the topics in Alex, I feel like there are a lot more topics. Certain things have more topics, certain things students are going to get more in, certain things they're not. And so I tried as much as I could, and I didn't get a lot of complaints about the equity and like, oh, we're not getting enough or things like that. So I tried to give them a lot more questions in Sapling, and or Achieve now is what it's called. And I also supplemented with worksheets, a lot of kind of reviews, things like that. But that's a fair point. Anything else? Okay. Cool. All right. So I'm more than happy to answer questions after as well. But I just wanted to give a space for people to share if they wanted to at this point. All right. So the next question, or the next kind of study, again, QR code, a link to the paper, is more looking at the perception. So I had done the study, the previous one, to look at, hey, what's actually going on? And the reason the first study happened was I wanted to make an argument to my colleagues that, hey, we should try Alex because sapling had been used forever and it was the status quo. Why do we need to change? And so presenting this to my colleagues saying, hey, this is what the data are showing was yay. So yay, this is good. But I also wanted to know, because when I started out using Alex, a lot of people told me, oh, students hate Alex, it sucks. And so I wanted to look at the students' point of view. What are they saying? What are they thinking? And so Dia and I looked at this kind of perceptions of student perceptions of online homework and their attitude towards these systems. Do they really hate Alex? And so the two research questions that this study looked at were, what are students' general perceptions of homework, and what differences, if any, exist in student attitude towards Alex and sapling? And so what was going on here with perceptions? We didn't look at grades here. We just looked at what are students saying about this. And so we collected data in the fall 2019 and spring 2020 semesters, also Chem 1. The difference between the study and the previous study was we were able to get students to use Alex and sapling simultaneously. So at this point in the semester, I had gotten my colleagues to agree with me, and they're like, all right, okay, this is cool. ALEKS is working. And so every section was using ALEKS and Sapling for the study. The total points for homework was 75 points per system, so 150 out of 1,000 total points, so I think 15%. And in order to figure out the attitudes, we used a pre-post survey that was kind of modified based off Michelle Richards-Babb and her colleagues' paper that they published in 2018. We tweaked that survey and gave that to students, a pre-post type of survey. We did have a lot of participants, as you can see from the numbers, but that's because we offered extra credit. And as you likely know, students will do almost anything for extra credit. And so we had quite a large population across the board. Most students participated in this study. And so here are the pre-survey questions. Just again, getting background about what students thought about homework. The highlighted statements questions are kind of what we focused on. So what are some positive reasons for doing homework? How important do you think it is to complete homework? How important is it to complete homework correctly? And do you believe your performance on homework is related to your performance on exams? Why not? And then for the post survey, after they had, so the pre-survey was before they started using the homework assignments. It was given at the beginning of the semester. The post survey was after using both ALEKS and Sapling. Do you believe your performance on Sapling and ALEKS is related directly to your performance on Chem 1? Why not? What are some positive reasons for doing Sapling, and what are some positive reasons for doing ALEKS? And so here is a breakdown of our survey participants. Most of them are first year students. Most of them were STEM majors. I do want to note that in the spring we had used, and this is typical, we typically have more female students than male students, as opposed to the fall where it's a little bit more even. But typically this is what this looked like at Oklahoma. We would have more nursing students who happen to be female come through in the spring. So the first research question, what are students' general perceptions of homework? So before they start taking, doing ALEKS, doing Sapling, doing whatever, what are their perceptions? And we use the pre-survey to answer this question. And so one of the questions we had asked was, hey, do you think students should receive homework in chemistry courses? And majority of the students said yes. Yes, students should receive homework. However, when we broke them down based on their major STEM versus non-STEM, more non-STEM students didn't think homework was a thing. Again, 30%, so was not a significant chunk, but still a higher percentage compared to non-STEM, compared to STEM majors. So non-STEM majors weren't necessarily seeing the why of the homework compared to STEM majors. When we asked in the pre-survey what were some positive reasons, and these were a select all that apply kind of statement. What are some positive reasons for doing homework? Majority of the students said homework helps me learn the subject. So 90% of them said, hey, this is what homework helps me do. Shocker, not a lot of students thought homework was interesting, right? We're like, oh my gosh, why not? But homework should be interesting, right? Hear me out. I think it should be. And one of the reasons I have this highlighted is what can we do? So these are the thoughts, right? How can we make this more exciting, more fun for the students? But these were kind of the breakdowns for students based on what they think some good reasons are for doing homework. And so in general, students think homework is important, right? Majority of the students, 70% plus or minus, think homework is important. One of the questions we had asked was, hey, how does this relate? Like, did you have homework in high school? How does it relate? And so if we have any K through 12 teachers here, a lot of the students said, hey, well, this was what I did in high school, so I expected to do this in college. And so the standard in high school sets the standard, at least, or the expectation, I should say, for college. And so what they do in high school is going to set them up for, hey, this is what I think should be happening in college as well. Interestingly, more students believe that completing homework is more important than completing it correctly. So they were just like, hey, let's get, yes, they wanted the grade. Yes, they wanted to get, an A, a good grade, but more of them said, hey, we should just complete it versus completing it correctly. So which we thought was interesting as well. And most of the students, again, based off the pre-survey, believe that there's a correlation between the performance on homework and their performance on exams. So if I do well on the homework, I expect to do well on the exams, which we know isn't necessarily the case. And so the second part of this, we wanted to look at, well, what differences exist in student attitudes towards ALEKS versus Sapling. So I went in hearing, oh my goodness, like people hate ALEKS, professors hate it, students hate it. And so what was going on? What is going on here? Is this really the case? And so first I asked, hey, do you believe your performance on Sapling or ALEKS is directly related to your performance on Chem 1 exams? And so majority of the students believed that 50%, plus or minus in the fall, a higher percentage, in the spring, a lower percentage, but more students said, hey, ALEKS, I think relates more to how I do on ALEKS is more related to how I'm going to do on the exam. Okay. And so when we asked, because we had asked the students why, so why not, which do you think is related to your performance on the exam? And so very few students only chose one homework assignment versus the other. So when we said, hey, which do you think helps you perform well on the exam? Only ALEKS, only Sapling, and then both homework systems. And so for the students that only chose ALEKS, the reasons they gave were the step-by-step explanation. So if you have never used ALEKS before, they will usually give you like depending on the topic, a long tutorial saying, hey, this is how you need to go through all these things. Sometimes it's too much, but the students that picked just ALEKS as the one that shows the relationship between their exam and their homework, liked this idea of the step-by-step explanations, details, the knowledge checks. So again, having kind of prepping you before an exam. Those that chose Sapling as showing relationship between the homework and the exam talked about ALEKS being too time consuming, Sapling being more related to what they're learning in class. And this student liked it because there was less explanation. Like I said, sometimes ALEKS does the most with the explanations, but again, some people like it, some people don't. For students that chose both, so majority of these students were saying yes, like, yep, both ALEKS and Sapling are helping me. And the gist was for the students that chose this, or hey, these homework assignments are helping me learn the material and the skills that I need to do my homework, my exam. And so that was the gist of the kind of the summary of the comments that we were seeing for the students that picked both. A pretty large percentage of students picked neither. Hey, neither of these things, which again, we know just because you do well on your homework doesn't mean you're going to do well on the exam. And we can talk about why that is. But these students are saying exactly, hey, I could get an A on the homework, but a B or C on the exam. Some of the questions we haven't gone through before. I understand the material on Sapling, but when it comes to the tests, I think it's completely different, which again isn't necessarily the case, but we know based on experience, based on practice, that if you change even a word, based on what students are familiar with their homework, they freak out and they're like, we haven't done this before. Okay. And so when we asked for reasons to complete the homework, students, again, this is post actually having done the homework, most of them are talking about the fact that homework helps them complete, helps them learn the subject or the content. So ALEKS, 76% in both the fall and the spring, a lower percentage for Sapling, but still a majority. When asked for downsides to completing ALEKS and Sapling, the time. And I think for those that are familiar with ALEKS, that have students that do ALEKS, that is probably the #1 complaint. I think they're getting better with this, but like the progress bar, you get 2 right, and then you get 1 wrong, and you have to go back from the beginning. It is time consuming, and students said this. Very few students talked about it, both homework systems not helping them do better. So again, they're recognizing that the homework systems are there or homework is there to help them learn the subject, help them do better. I thought it was interesting that more Sapling students said they thought the homework was hard to understand, hard to complete. Actually, a pretty high percentage across the board, 30% are like, this is hard to complete. But it's interesting that more sapling students are saying, hey, this is hard, where I would argue that sapling sometimes seems more straightforward than Alex. And so these were reasons students gave for completing homework. So looking at this, so again, asking students, hey, I didn't just ask, hey, how do you feel about this? Do you like this? Do you hate this? That was not the point. I wanted them to look beyond, I'm frustrated with the time, and kind of look at what are some positive reasons? What are some downsides? And looking at this, what I learned from this was students don't necessarily hate one homework system over the other. There's certain things about so for example, the time that students don't appreciate. But I think overall, students, again, based off this, it helps me learn the subject. Students appreciate the why of the homework systems. And so kind of tying this up, I think based on our data, and we had quite a few students completing this, over 2,000. Most students see the importance of completing homework. Now, we can argue about whether they see the importance of completing it completely correctly or not, but they think it's important. Hey, we need to do this to learn the content. There is a correlation. We found a correlation between students' previous experiences in science courses and their attitude towards homework in Chem 1. So students that, again, are coming in with, we did homework in high school, we're doing this, are more likely to expect to do homework in Gen Chem, their first semester in college versus those that didn't. Students do value both. And so for this study, they had both systems. So all students were using both systems. They found value in both systems. The sapling questions were more similar to the exam questions. They were, again, we had used sapling forever at Oklahoma. And so the questions, they were very similar to what they were seeing on the exams. But more students were saying, hey, Alex is actually more effective for learning the content. And I would argue it's because of those knowledge checks, because of those repetitive kind of things that students are able to do. Students did not have negative attitudes towards Alex, but they did not like the amount of time spent on Alex. And so so now when I talk to people about Alex, I'm like, no, you need to kind of set it up for your students. Say, hey, this is why this is important. If you're able to communicate to the students why this is important, they see that and they're not going to just say, I hate this. Okay. So there were a couple of limitations. So 2020 kind of rocked our worlds, and that was kind of the COVID thing. Everybody went online. And so that could be a limitation to the study. So going back here, the questions being closer to the exam questions being closer to sapling, we had to move everything online. And so all our questions were now being drawn from question banks. They're doing it online, they can look it up. And so there was all that came with that. There were multiple sections, so we didn't correct for different instructors, different kind of stuff that was happening in the individual classes. And so that is one limitation to the study. And we also didn't look at exam grades. So were students who are scoring higher, were they more likely to say, I like sapling or I like Alex? Were lower scoring students likely to say one way or another? But that, I think, would be an interesting thing to look at, just based on assessments and how they influence different underrepresented populations differently. Implications. And again, so this was published in 2021, 2022. And I've, done a lot of other studies, a lot of other things since then. And a lot of these implications are based off, yes, this is what we've done, but this is how this is influencing what I'm doing in my class as well. And so one of the things that I do is give more guidance regarding the goals of homework assignments. So why are you doing this? Hey guys, I'm having you do this because this. I think students need a little bit more clarity regarding why. Why do we do homework assignments? Again, why? Be more explicit. Don't you literally say, hey, you are doing this because this, right? I think students, especially your first year students, need to see that a little bit more. is almost intuitive for us. That the more you practice, for us practitioners, the more you practice, the better you're going to get. But students aren't necessarily seeing that. I think one of the biggest things that I've taken out of this study is the type of homework system doesn't matter. There's some people that are very much pro ALEKS. Yes, let's do ALEKS. Some people absolutely hate ALEKS and they're like, Mastery in Chem is the way, or Active is the way, or Top Hat is the way. I don't think the system really matters that much, but I think the how, I think it's on us instructors to think about how we can get students to buy into whatever system we're using, whether it's ALEKS or Sapling, Achieve, or Top Hat, whatever it is. There's a lot more that we need to do to get our students to buy in to what we use and why. Okay. Pause, reflect, and any comments on that? You're welcome to unmute too, if that would be more helpful.
So Toby, I have a question. Sorry,
Yep, go
I
ahead.
have lots of dogs in the background. So my question is it time for us to give a different name to homework? Instead of being called homework, should it be called study work? And the reason I ask is because sometimes, like you'll see on your evaluation, sorry, that students are like, oh, all that homework I had to do prevented me from studying for the exam. And it's like, but doing homework is studying. So what are your thoughts?
I would agree. I think students honestly give more weight, if you would, to study guides. I provide study guides, but my study guides are literally questions in PowerPoint form. And so I take a multiple choice question and I put it in a PowerPoint and I take out the multiple choice answers and have them work through it. So I think, yeah, again, helping students change their mindset and say, this is not busy work. This is literally helping you study for your exam, study for your quiz. Yeah, I would be on board with that. We can do study work. Keith is asking, are the non-STEM students actively choosing to do chem as especially interested in the subject, or are they required to choose a science course to graduate? A lot of the students are required to choose a science course to graduate. I didn't look at the why for the non-STEM majors that selected it, but a lot of the students I talked to fall into two categories. This is either they're, hey, I need a science course, I'm going to do chem, or they're pre-med. So I had a business major once that was pre-med, and so yes, I think a little bit of both, Keith, but I would have to kind of look back into the demographics to answer that question a lot clearer.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, thank you. So Neem's asking, what do you think about characteristics for a homework system to be considered decent? Okay, so I think for me, I like adaptive. I like ALEKS. I am pro ALEKS. I will say that. I like the idea that, and the reason is because I have so many students that I typically teach large enrollment Gen Chem. And so I've had anywhere from 100 to 350, 360. I know they're bigger classes. So, but that's typically what I teach. And I think, so in that big of a class, even in a smaller classroom, you have students that are coming in at different places. And I don't think it's fair for a student that already knows how to balance, already has done stoichiometry and knows how to do that, to spend hours or, hey, here are 20 questions on stoichiometry. Everybody's going to do it. And so ALEKS is or any adaptive system essentially says, hey, you show me you know this. All right, we're going to skip. You do 3 questions instead of doing 10 or 20. And so I think in that way, for me, that's what I would like. However, I think there are ways to make the adaptive a part of your class. And so in addition to these adaptive homework systems. I actually also provide, like I said, review questions for my students. I provide a lot of different, I use clicker questions in my class. I provide a lot of other ways for students to practice. So I think as long as you're able to provide, again, know who your students are, know your audience, as long as you're able to provide a lot of different ways, a lot of different venues for them to practice, that's what I look for in a homework system. What was the most convincing data for the instructors to move to the, you're welcome, Neem, homework, to the adaptive? I think it was the retention part. That was what sold them on that, because sometimes, you know, your averages on the exams could be like, hey, you know, your students just, you know, did stuff. But the fact that the data showed that students were retaining a lot more, were retaining more in the ALEKS section. And again, I would argue it's the knowledge checks. It's those kind of, and I had the knowledge checks set for every 3 weeks. I think it's that constant getting students to think about what it is they're doing. I think that's what sold them. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Well, like I said, this is stuff that I did earlier in my career. I still am pretty early in my career, but it was a little bit earlier. But a lot of this has influenced how I teach. And so this semester, for example, I'm giving students a couple of chances to show me, so this idea of mastery. I have 4 exams and then a final, but I am giving students kind of a cumulative pre-final to show me, and I told them this the first day of class. If you can show me that, hey, you've learned everything, so maybe you didn't do as well on the exam 2 because it just took you a little bit longer to learn stoichiometry, whatever it is. Giving them that opportunity to show me, hey, it's taking me the whole semester, but I've learned this. And if they do better on that exam, I'm going to replace one of their other exams, and their final exam can replace one. So giving students 2 opportunities to replace exams, if they're able to show me they've done better, they were able to show me they've mastered stuff. And so implications, I think, for teaching, listen more to students. What are your students saying? And I think every semester, your student group is going to say something different. And so I try to listen to my students every semester. Office hours, I send out mid-semester surveys saying, hey, what's going on? What do you like? What don't you like? How can I do better? I've been very clear about the goal of the homework. Every assessment I give, I tell my students why. This is why I'm doing what I'm doing. This is what is going on. This is why, this is how this is going to help you prepare for the exam. And one of the things that I'm doing more of, so if you're at the biennial conference on chemistry education, I gave a talk with Morgan Balabanoff about assessing. And one of the things I've been thinking about is how can I assess my students more effectively and fairly? How can I be consistent in assessing them? How can I give both formative and summative assessments, but in a way that is consistent, that helps them kind of think about what they know, think about what it is that they don't know, help me think about what they don't know and help them with that. And then finally, I am looking for more ways to give students more opportunities to check what they know. So this semester, I'm going to have a quiz every week, and it's going to be, I'm going to pop up 3 questions, have them based on what we have covered, have the students pick one of those questions and do them, right? And then grade that, but give students more opportunities in addition to my clicker questions to kind of figure out what it is they know and what it is that they don't know. So thank you all very much. I appreciate your time. I appreciate the questions. I appreciate the feedback. I'm happy to take questions, comments, concerns.
Thank you so much, Toby. Yes, as Toby said, we open it up for any like questions, concluding thoughts, those types of things.
So I was going to ask Toby, I had written down while you were talking about the ALEKS versus the sapling. I think that was what it was. If you had compared student success to the system that they preferred, and then you went on to say you didn't collect student data, but I was wondering, like when we started using ALEKS, one of the reasons we wanted to use ALEKS was because we felt like using something like Sapling, you're giving all the students the same homework, no matter how prepared they are or how ready they are for it. Whereas with Alex, you're giving them the homework when they're ready. So then students who need to do more homework, like maybe your DNC students, are doing more homework because they need to do that, that homework, whereas A students aren't. So I'm wondering if, there's an effect of success in the students who liked Alex versus those who didn't. Like maybe your more advanced students or the ones who are more prepared liked Alex more because they weren't perceiving themselves as wasting time, whereas in Sapling they did. Does that make sense?
It does. It would make sense that higher scoring, higher achieving students would like Alex more than Sapling. But anecdotally, and I haven't looked into this and I'm not sure why, I should, but anecdotally, just based off conversations I have with students, I actually have a lot of low performing students that are like, this is great. It gives me a chance to kind of practice and make sure that I'm able to get the content and still get full credit for it. What I see with the higher, so students that are going to get A's are going to get A's, right? Regardless of what you use, they usually like everything. They want all the homework. The kind of lower end, I think, prefer Alex for sure. I think the middle students is probably where we're going to see a lot more variation. And I also think it's going to be dependent on the type of student.